Thanks for having me back. I always enjoy coming up here. All of you who know this, that it gets better and better, speaking of anxiety, right? So talking about these topics, though, is a passion of mine, and anybody who has talked with me for any period of time and we get onto a mental health topic, especially when it concerns our children, our adolescents, I get very, very passionate about that. As Mr. Sullivan said, this is an epidemic. 1 in 8 of our children suffers from diagnosable anxiety in one of its many forms, and that is one of the most key predictors to diagnose depression and anxiety as a teen or as an adult. And it is an epidemic, and it's untreated for the most part in most of our children and most of our adolescents and our adults. And so the more we can talk about it, the more we can know what we're looking at and know how to resource our kids as from the youngest age we can, the better things will be. So we need to be talking about it. So I love to come up here and do that. I'm going to start with talking about, when we talk about anxiety, we think anxiety, but there are many, many forms of anxiety. So I like to talk about it from an umbrella perspective. So anxiety is like a big umbrella, and then there's many different types of anxiety that that'll come into my office, and then we have to kind of discern what we're talking about. I'm just going to throw them out there. I'm not going to really talk about what each one is. I'm sure you're familiar with some of them. But generalized anxiety, pretty much self-explanatory. It's just generalized overall worry. Panic disorder, separation anxiety, which presents more in young children. Social anxiety disorder, that is an actual diagnosable disorder, is social anxiety. Phobias of any kind. OCD, which is becoming more and more prevalent in our young kids. And so I'm starting to work more with these younger kids, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds coming in my office that have obsessions or compulsions. These are ways that they're trying to manage their anxiety. And so it's really creeping down into our younger kids. And then PTSD, which is trauma-based anxiety, but it is kind of tracking with throughout their life. So those are just the different types of anxiety that we look at. We're going to talk more in a general sense, and then I'm going to get more specific of probably what you're seeing, if you're seeing any types of anxiety for your children. We're going to talk about a couple key ways that we may see it in our houses, and then I have some specific, maybe some skills that you can actually use at home with your kids to walk through an anxious situation or something that's worrying your kids. So we'll get to that in just a minute. Symptoms of anxiety. Children and teens present a little bit differently, and so talking about anxiety symptoms in children, those are mostly going to be behavioral. Our kids don't know how to wrap words around their thoughts and around their emotions, and so we see these things more behaviorally presented and physically presented. So what we see in our little kiddos is tummy aches and headaches, things that their body is trying to communicate to them about having anxiety. Other things we see behaviorally is a change in school performance. So a kid that's tracking at a BA and is going down to C's or D's without any real, significant, like we can't point it out. We want to look at something emotional. Excessive worry, avoidance, that's a big one. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Hyperactivity. Nightmares is a big one for our little kids because those things will replay in their dreams, and so waking up a lot. Difficulty falling asleep and staying asleep. That is a key for anxiety. Frequent disobedience, aggression, and tantrums, and that's outside of our normal, disciplinary kids kind of thing, but an increase, a change in that behavior. And then, as I mentioned, the physical things. So those are what we're looking at in our little kids, the ones that are kind of that middle school-y, kind of developmentally moving into pre-adult stage. When we're getting into teens are different. Teens will worry excessively, but they look more irritable. And again, this is tough because regularly teens are irritable. And so to really be looking for changes, increases in irritability, it changes in what their normal seems to be. Restlessness, fidgetiness, an inability to sit still. And again, some of our kids are more are more, fidgety by nature. So we're looking for changes. We're looking for shifts in these behaviors. A decrease in functioning, and that can be anything. That can be social functioning, that can be school functioning, athletic or extracurricular functioning, is a difficulty in doing life, is what I like to say. So in whatever way that they're doing life normally, if that is shifting and their functioning is decreasing, we need to pay attention to that. Drug and alcohol use is a key factor. They're trying to cope, and that's what that is, that drugs and alcohol are really effective in managing anxiety. That's the problem. Avoidance. Avoidance is a key thing in anxiety, is trying to run away from the thing that is making them nervous or scared, is they'll try not to do it. And so if they don't want to go to school, if they don't want to, go to a certain place, if they're really actively trying to stay away from that, pay attention to that. There's a reason. Sleep issues, as I mentioned. And then our teenagers have physical issues too. Stomach aches, headaches, different things that are happening in their body. So those are some things that you want to look at for symptoms. So how can we help? That's why we came, right? How can we help as parents? I made a list of things that are more specific to children, and then things that are more specific maybe to teenagers, but there are some things that just are general across the board. And I'm going to start with those things. The first and key thing is to develop a culture of conversation, safety around emotions in our households. And I know for a lot of people that isn't a comfort zone. That is something that us personally, we don't like to do. Maybe we didn't grow up doing that. We don't know how to do it. To start to develop conversations about asking about feelings, talking about our own, developing language around that, normalizing that in the family. So it becomes something that we just can bring out, and it's not shocking or uncomfortable or squirmy. If it is shocking or uncomfortable or squirmy, talk about that. This is uncomfortable for me. Make it okay for our kids to feel awkward. I feel awkward too. Now it's okay. Mom and dad feel awkward, so it's okay to feel awkward, and we can talk about these things. When I use the word safety, when we're talking about a culture of conversation in our families, I'm talking about emotional safety. The biggest barrier that I hear from, not so much from children, but definitely my adolescents, in talking with their families or talking in the home about their emotions, is they don't feel like their parents listen, or they feel like their parents judge them or lecture them. And I know that parents don't intend to do this. This is not our heart. But some of the ways that we can come off to our children sounds like we're not listening. So when we come with a quick answer rather than just listening to what they have to say, when they're repeatedly nervous or irritable and we are just telling them to pipe down, cool down, just get over it, deal with it, those kinds of things. What's wrong with you? You keep doing this. Those kinds of responses when we are maybe not noticing, those will shut our child down. And so really recognizing when our kids are struggling and being able to really open up and talk about that in the family system. Notice out loud. So when we're noticing our children or our adolescents that are struggling with something, notice it out loud in a private setting, not in front of the whole family, but with your child. Say, hey, I've noticed that you've been a little restless lately. Is there anything that you would want to talk about? So to be able to say, hey, I notice you, I pay attention to you, you matter to me. For your teenagers, 9.5 times out of 10, they're going to say no. And then they're going to probably circle back around when things are safe and come back at you with whatever they want to talk about with that. But notice out loud. Listen. And you guys, if anybody has ever heard me talk before, what is my big thing? Ask, don't tell. Ask, don't tell. Listen to our kids. They're very in tune with the nuances of a lecture, of a tell, of a solution, rather than a listen, okay? So that is turning them back around when they have a problem that we jump in with, here's A, B, and C of what you can do to solve that. To them, you're not listening. You are just coming in to solve the problem. You're just not sitting with them in it. And they just want to be able to process it. And then the last point that we can do as parents that is a really difficult one, but this one's a really important one, is to really pay attention to how you personally or how your family in general handles anxiety. To be listening to how do we handle when we're stressed out? How do we talk? How do we deal with a difficulty? What is our self-talk and our language? Our kids are picking up on that. And so for us to be able to pay attention to ourselves and learn a little bit about how we manage anxiety is going to be one of the key factors in how our children handle anxiety. Brian uses a term, these things are caught more than taught, and this is one of those definite areas where our kids are picking up on the way that we talk about things. How do we handle mistakes? What do we say to ourselves or about ourselves when we have a mistake? I've shifted my language. I didn't do this before, but I now call mistakes, oh, there's another growth point. So it's not, yeah, I didn't do it right, but it's an opportunity for me to learn something rather than, using language about how I don't get it or that kind of thing. Our kids are listening to that. And so when we can position it as an opportunity to learn something new, they will too. How do we handle failure? When is something good enough? And this is getting into perfectionism. I'll get into that in a minute. And what is our out loud self-talk? So paying attention to our out loud self-talk. Okay, so that's for what we can do as parents and families all across the board. For children in particular, when our little kids come to us with anxiety or we can recognize that they are anxious, as I had mentioned earlier, our little kids don't have a really great grasp of language for emotion. Emotion is abstract, it's foreign, it's scary sometimes. We don't know what to do with it sometimes, and as a little kid, they don't know what to do with words. They don't know how to talk about it, which is why it's behaviorally presented so often. And so to start creating opportunities for naming emotions for our kids. Anybody see feelings faces sheets? Have you ever seen those things? Okay, so using those feeling faces sheets can be a really helpful thing with our little kids, even kind of our older little kids, because it keeps them from having to grab the emotion and they can just kind of look and pick one out. And so having one of those on your fridge, I used to have one on my fridge with a little arrow, so you didn't really have to talk about how you felt. You could just go move the arrow and point it at which thing you felt like today. I want to throw caution out there. I know there's a lot of feelings faces sheets and posters on the web, and you can pull those things down and print them, but make sure that you're going through them really carefully, because some of them have things that we don't want our kids to be describing, like hungover. And there's some that are just more adult oriented and they're buried inside of, so just make sure you go through them before you put those on the refrigerator. There are some that are very, very kid oriented, so you want to make sure you're doing that. So helping our child name the feelings, that's a really important one we can do with our kids. Using a team approach to help the child think of solutions. So again, this is going back to that, we don't want to tell our kids how to handle it. We want to ask them, well, what do you think? And what are some things that you've seen or heard, or what do you think might work? So we're really developing a team mentality for them. And what we're doing is we're setting the stage for, as they're older, really sending the message that we believe you can do this. You've got it inside of you. You've got wisdom, you've got answers, and I want to pull that out of you. That's an important message for later in life when our college kids are coming back home, because they don't know that they can do it and can handle things, because that message hasn't been internalized, because they've been told. They aren't asked. Listen and then move on. Sometimes when our kids are worried or stressed, all they need to do is they just need to barf it out, and then they're done, and it's fine. So sometimes not making a bigger thing out of it than it is, and that's just knowing your kid. Okay, so sometimes that is the case. It's not a big thing. Limit stress when possible, and I'm going to get into this a little bit later too, but I call this the boulder in the backpack principle. A lot of parents tell children things your children have no business knowing. They just don't need to know. They're adult situations, they're adult problems that they don't need to have access to or hear. So making sure you're having some of these conversations outside of their little earshot. This is even for teenagers. There are things that they don't need to be carrying around, and I call it the boulder in the backpack because essentially what that's doing is it's like putting big, huge boulders into our children's backpacks and having them carry these issues around because they carry them around. They carry them very heavily and they feel responsible for them sometimes. So being very careful about what we bring to our children in terms of, problems and issues. I have kids that come to me with budgeting issues, 8, 9, and 10-year-olds, and I just can't even fathom why that would be a big deal because they hear mommy and daddy talking about money problems. And so these little ones will walk around with this worry. Well, I don't want to ask them for this because mommy and daddy talk about money problems. And so now they're stressed about things because they're carrying that. And so just being very, very mindful of that. Just being there as parents. This is really important. In an age of screens, in an age of intense distraction, is we have more opportunity for distraction in our culture right now than ever before. And we have to be very, very intentional about being present with our children, being present in our mind and in our body. Because how many times have you been physically present with your child and mentally somewhere different, right? And so being all in the room, our kids can sense that. And just that knowing can be a very powerful thing for our children. Being patient with our kids is an important one because sometimes it takes them some time to get it out. And then one of the practical things that I do with children, this is one of the many activities you can do with a little kid, is to develop what I call a worry box, or you can call it a prayer box, but making it concrete. So if your children have worries or anxieties or things that they're just kind of carrying with them and they don't know what to do with it, that we write it down or we draw a picture about it and then we put it in the box. Now it's in the box. That's the prayer box. So we pray about it, we put it in the box, and now it's gone. I developed a visual where my box is at the foot of the cross. And so you might even want to draw a picture of a cross and put that box, after you've prayed about it, it's at the foot of the cross. It's now in Jesus' hands. And so to do that with a younger child is a really powerful, concrete way to handle worry and to shift it off and to give it where it needs to go, right? Because we need to be giving those things back to God and have Him handle it. So that is a great activity that you can do ongoing with your little kids. So teens are a little bit more difficult, right? Because they're not going to come to us very often. There's that developmental problem where they're really resisting all adult input during their teen years, which is a great thing and a difficult thing when they have to manage something they don't know how to manage, like anxiety. That idea of having that alternate or third parent, that extra adult in your child's life is huge. Studies have shown that can be one of those key factors for emotional health in our children. To have that other that's not a parent to talk to. It could be a counselor, it doesn't have to be. It can be a best friend. You know, my best friend is my kid's second mom. And we have an understanding that if my children go to her with something that she doesn't tell me, that if my children tell her that I trust her, she doesn't tell me, and both my kids know that. And so they have a different adult other that they don't have to come to me if they don't want to, but there's somebody that I trust in their life. They also have a couple of cool aunts that they do that. So we are really blessed with that, but making sure that you guys have somebody else in your life that you trust your children to go talk to, and your children know that that's not just going to come right back to mom and dad. That's key. That's key in my office because a lot of kids will come in and they won't talk to me because they think I'm just going to turn around and talk to mom and dad. And so I make it very, very clear that legally, mom and dad, you get to ask me every single thing that happens in this office, and legally I have to tell you. I'm asking you not to. And so with that in place, that frees up your child to be able to talk about the things that they want to talk about but don't feel like they can talk about with you. And don't get offended or defensive about that. Every parent goes through that. It's not specific to you and your child. This is normal and developmental. They're learning how to be an individual, and us parents are the first people that they individuate away from. So having that other. Using the team effort again. We're not telling our adolescents what to do, we're asking them, what do you think we should do? And we're configuring some coping strategies together as a team. We want to help our teams connect their physical. So I had mentioned earlier that there's physical manifestations of anxiety. It's very much connected to our gut, and then headaches and body aches and those kinds of things. But sometimes our teams don't know that, is they're not as insightful about their body, they're not paying attention to their body, and so helping them put those things together. We're really wanting to work with our teens' intellect and their prefrontal cortex that is developing, their problem-solving skills that are developing as they're getting older. And we want to help them track back. Well, what do you think was the cause of this, the trigger of this? And we're working together with them. We're not telling them, we're helping to develop this skill in them to find solutions to their anxiety. So as far as teen patterns, so there's 3 basic patterns that we see with teens when they are developing anxiety, and I'm seeing it in kids too. The resources I was using were talking mostly about teens, but I do see it in my little kids too, my 8, 9, and 10-year-olds. And the first one is perfectionism. Is your kid a perfectionist? Are you a perfectionist? Is there not a good enough? Is there a black and white? It's all or nothing. It's perfect or it's horrible. Is there that kind of a mindset in your house? That is anxiety producing, because there is no such thing as perfect, and so there's a constant striving for that. Our teens have that tendency often. The second is catastrophic thinking. And that's one that's pretty common too. If one thing goes wrong, it's all lost. And that's a pretty common thing with our teens. So listening for that. Is it if they're feeling like everything is lost, is it because one thing, because they got one bad grade on a test or something like that? So this is where that tracking back and really identifying where the triggers for that anxiety come from are going to help you identify this. But catastrophic thinking, this isn't just a teen thing, this is a everybody thing. I definitely do that. This is one of the things that I pay attention to for myself. And then the third one is one path myth. So what that means, and I see this a lot in our teens and our early adults, the one path myth means there is one path to success, and if I don't find it and get on it, I will not succeed. Life will not be good. And then there is one definition of success, and it is this path with no other options, and that is highly anxiety producing. It's also a farce, and we all know that, because pretty much all of us, if we started college, if we went to college, we probably didn't end the way we started, nor do we have the career maybe we studied to do in college, right? So we all know that our paths are winding, and it's a very, very beautiful way to live life, but when we have this one path myth, there's this anxiety about getting it right, and an all or nothing, it kind of shifts into that all or nothing kind of mentality. So I wanted to wrap up here with a couple of practical, some of the skills or some of the approaches that I use when I'm in the office to help people and to deal with anxiety and these thought processes that I was talking about that will generate and keep anxiety going. And so I just kind of drew it out here. I have a whiteboard in my office and I use it all the time. But I'm going to just show you here what I do. And this one's very simple, okay? So this one is what I would work with overwhelmed, with those who are overwhelmed. And who doesn't get overwhelmed, right? Is you have a list of things to do, it feels like you've got way too many things, then you do hours in the day to get them done, and you freeze, and you end up not doing anything. And you just kind of feel like I'm not productive or I can't do anything. I see this with kids who come back home from college. I see this with kids who are in high school who have this idea that they have to be just top of the class or perfect or getting everything done in a very timely manner, and they don't get anything done. And then their grades are suffering and their social life is suffering, and they're just inundated with, this mountain of things that they have developed in their life. And so what I do is say, okay, so we're going to take, what is your goal? And so the example I'll use is I have a gal she's taking calculus and she wants to ace calculus. And she is frozen with anxiety because she doesn't know how she's going to get through calculus, okay? So her goal up here is we want to pass calculus. I made her back down from ACE. We're going to pass it, okay? So we're going to have pass calculus as your goal. She's down here, right? And we have a list of things that we have to do that's called a syllabus, or, you know, a document that says this is what you need to do in order to pass calculus. But all she can do, she sits there and she will look at an assignment and say, I'm going to fail the test, I'm going to fail calculus, I'm never going to be able to do this. And so she's standing down here and she's looking up here. And she's saying, how am I going to pass calculus? How am I going to pass calculus? And she's standing on here and I'm telling her, you don't have to pass calculus. This is not about passing calculus. You have assignment number 2 and that's all you have to do. That's all you have to do. But I have to pass calculus. Yes, you do have to pass calculus. But today, all you have to do is get to this step. Because if you don't get to this step, you're not going to get to this step nor to this step. But if we sit there and stare at the big goal, at the big mountain up ahead of us, we're going to feel overwhelmed. We're not going to be able to do anything. And generally what happens is freeze, is we shut down and we don't do anything. And so we develop a really great set of steps, of goals, of intermediate, one at a time goals that we can develop with our children. And this is great for adults. I mean, I do this all the time. I get an idea of where I'm going and then head down and plow. And I do this today. But our children don't know how to do this. And all they can see is this. And they feel, and then we put that one path myth in here. If I don't get this right, that my life is going to fall apart. So now that mountain just got bigger. So this is a very simple strategy that you can use with almost any overwhelmed kid to develop just one step at a time. We're just living in today and we're doing the next right thing and we'll move our way toward the goal. Okay, very simple. All right. The next is peer-related anxiety. So that was more school-related or goal-related or performance-related anxieties when we get overwhelmed with all of it. Peer-related anxiety obviously is a lot more complicated, right? It can have a lot of dynamics to it. One of the ways that I start to work that out with kids and with children is using character qualities. And so I will draw, and I'm not an artist, so my next picture is not very good, but I'll have them write or put a picture of just a person, and then I have a list of character qualities. And I will have them identify what character qualities they want in the people in their lives, their friends, you know, the people that they spend time with. And we will actually write those character qualities on the inside of this person. You can do this with little kids too. You just kind of pare down those character qualities to things that they can wrap their brain around. And so we're really making it very concrete of the kind of people that we want in our life. And then we start talking about where is the anxiety coming? Where is the peer-related stuff? And what character qualities are you seeing in those people that are around you? And usually what's happening is we're seeing character qualities that are not similar to the things that they want in their life. And then we start asking, well, why are you attracted to this person with the character qualities that you don't want to hang around with? And we can have really, really, really great conversations about that. Because we're not thinking about that when we are all distracted by, you know, not being in the in-group or, you know, so-and-so's not talking to me, and we're very distracted by that. So doing something that says, no, what is the big picture? Who do we want in our life? Who do we want to be? These are very, very helpful strategies that we can always come back to, being character qualities. And then the third one, anxiety-related things that I see increasingly, and this is breaking my heart too, is world-related, culture-related, big issue-related anxiety. So these big horrible things that are happening in our world right now, our kids know. And this is very anxiety-producing because it's out of control, right? As they hear about these shootings, they hear about these storms and earthquakes and all of these things that are happening in our world, and our kids don't know what to do with that, especially our little kids. And so I use very simple locus of control. And you don't have to use the words locus of control. You can just use, you know, put the circle up there. And it's very simple. Is we use this circle, and this is our locus of control. We put everything that we can control inside the circle, and everything that we can't control on the outside of the circle. And so you can really do a really cool conversation with our little kids. I have really great conversations with our little kids because it dawns on them that they can't control anything about these big bad things that are happening. But what can you control? I can control when I talk to my mom and dad about it. For us, I can control when I pray about it. I can control how much I let my thoughts sit in it. I can control where I point my thoughts. I can control going out and playing instead of, looking at the TV where this is. These things are being shown to me. And so helping our children to see what is inside of the circle and helping them focus on this, and then us as people of faith, we take all of these other things and we add them to our prayer box. And we add them to prayer, because this is the stuff that we can't control. This is God's. All this is not mine, this is God's. This is mine. I'm in the box, my mind is in the box. The things I do are in the circle, and those are the things that I can control. So I take my child's mind back from trying to control the things that are out there that we can't control. That's the definition of anxiety, by the way, trying to control things we can't control. And I start to put their mind back on the things that they can control. And I'm partnering with my children. So these are just very quickly just some exercises that you can do with your children at home. A couple of points that I want to leave you with. We don't fix anxiety or fear by avoiding it, ever. The only way that we can heal and work through anxiety is leaning into it every time. And so we help our children by dealing with anxiety, not by helping them find a way out of anxiety. And sometimes when anxiety is high, we have to step away from the anxiety. But as a rule, we need to develop a way to step into it and empower our children to say, it's not the thing out here, it's what you've got in here that helps you move through the thing out here that is the key. And so we learn how to lean in, and we take steps, and we empower our children, and we partner with them. But this is one of those things that we can model. So if we're avoiding things, then we're modeling, that's how we deal with anxiety. So think about your own behavior. I say this every time the night before I come here. I'm leaning in, guys. And the other thing, some worry is normal. We worry. We're never going to get rid of worry. So some worry is just normal. So not to, get too worked up about our children worry about some things. And then I just wanted to touch really quickly, and I don't know if Anne is going to be doing this. I imagine she's going to, but mindfulness practice. And I know this is a buzzword in a Christian community because mindfulness, just the word mindfulness, has its roots in Buddhist tradition. But I want to try to disconnect that other faith tradition from the practice and what it is. Mindfulness as a practice, research shows, is one of the most powerful anti-anxiety remedies. Mindfulness simply means we are taking our mind off of the thing that is creating anxiety and putting it on something else. Mindfulness is awareness. Mindfulness is attention. The Bible is full of mindfulness practices. Philippians 4:8 says, whatsoever things are good, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things, right? Think on these things. That is a mindfulness practice. We just don't call it mindfulness. That's attached to some other faith tradition, but the practice is valuable. And so really practicing, how do we take our mind off of the thing that is creating anxiety and put it on the thing that creates peace? That is what we know. That is the truth of the Word. That is the truth of God with us. Has anybody ever seen The Shack? Okay, so you know that scene where he's out in the lake and he's in the boat, and the boat is sinking, and he's looking at it, and that inky black water is coming up through the boat, and he's looking down at it, and he's looking, and he's panicking, and he's scared, and he's ramping up. What is he mindful of? He's mindful of the problem, and what happens right there? Who remembers what happens? Jesus is standing right there, and he says, look at me. Look at me. Don't look at that. Look at me. And he keeps saying it. Look at me. Look at me. And what he's doing is he's saying, be mindful of me. Don't put that in your mind. Put me in your mind. And that's mindfulness practice. It's in the Word from beginning to end. And so when we can help our children practice mindfulness on a very, very small scale and really develop that practice throughout their life, they are going to be the best equipped to handle adversity and anxiety as they move through life. Mindfulness can start very, very basically. I start with people just paying attention to their breath, because figuring out how do I pull my mind out of something that it wants to be focused on, we need to give it something to focus on. So focusing on my breathing is a great place to start because it also calms my body at the same time. So doing some of those practices, I like to then invite Jesus into that. Is what would Jesus be telling you today about your day? So as you're breathing, think about what would Jesus be telling you about your day. Now I'm mindful of Jesus, I'm mindful of my body, and now I'm peaceful. So little bits of practice that you can do with your kids. Obviously there's a whole bunch of other things that you can do, and I could stand up here and talk for a long time, but I'll wrap up with that. Does anybody have any comments or questions or things to offer? No? Okay. All right. Thank you so much. I'm always very, very excited to come here and share, some of the things that can help our families and our kids. So thanks for having me.